Paul Holly, and I'm with Burr King Manufacturing, and today we're going to do a short video on how to change the coil on your magnetic starter boxes for any of our machinery here. Very first step you're going to want to do on anytime you work with electrical is disconnect the AC power supply. Once the AC power supply is disconnected, we'll go ahead and open up the box and begin to work on it. So we've got our power disconnected. We'll loosen the bolts on the clamps, open up the box. Once we've opened the box here, the first thing we're going to do is disconnect the start-stop switches. Just a matter of switching the lever over and pulling it right off there. Once we've disconnected that, we want to disconnect the ground on the door right here. Once we've disconnected the ground, we'll go into the bottom of the overload and disconnect T1, T2, and T3, which are the motor leads. So once we've disconnected those, we'll go ahead and remove the 4 screws which hold the panel into the back of the box. There's one in each corner. And once we've got those disconnected, we'll come out here on our cart and change out the coil for you. So here we have the coil laying here. And the very first thing we're going to want to do with everything set in here is disconnect T1, T2, and T3 on the contactor. So as soon as you unscrew those 3, your overload will go ahead and slide over here right out of the way. Then you want to come in just above the coil, and there's a latch. With the small flat screwdriver, just pop that latch over. The same thing on the bottom. And the upper part of the contactor will slide right apart. Okay, we'll set the spring aside. Loosen A1 on the coil. Pull the wire out. Be sure to note which wire you take out of which spot. That way you can replace it back in the exact same spot whenever you put this back together. And loosen A2. Now you've got that completely disassembled and you can take out the coil. Now as you can note on here, the coils are marked as far as what voltage they are recommended for. There's a range for anywhere from 24 clear up in the 500 volt. So you want to make sure you note which marking it is that you're needing. So once you've done that, to replace the coil, you just set the coil back in. You always want your markings, the writings, on the top side of the contactor. Put the spring back in place. Take the top part of your contactor, drop the center of the contactor right through the spring, and set it in place. When you do this, you'll always want to make sure that your contactor moves up and down freely. If it doesn't, then something has dropped in the wrong place and you need to pop it apart and double check everything. Everything is working properly, so we'll put the clip back in on the top, the clip back in on the bottom. Now the contactor is locked back in place. You want to replace the wires back in the proper mounting location. Tighten them securely. Then you want to put your overload back in T1, T2, and T3. Make sure you fasten these properly. Now since you have changed the voltage on your coil, you'll want to double check to make sure that your amperage setting is going to be set appropriate for the voltage that you went with. In this case, you would want to look at your motor, read the side of the motor plate, and see what the full load amperage is and set your overload accordingly. You're ready to reinstall the plate back into the box. Fasten it in place with the 4 screws inside the box. Replace the motor leads to T1, T2, and T3 on the overload. Fasten all grounds back in place. Snap the start-stop switches back in place. Now at this time, before you apply any power, you want to open the electrical box on the motor and wire the motor to the appropriate voltage that you have set with the coil. 208, 220, 240 is going to be your low voltage side. 440, 460, 480 will always be your high voltage side. Anytime you're doing this, you'll want to refer back to the wiring diagram that's on the motor. Once you've wired your motor to the appropriate wiring that you went with the coil, you can close the box. Fasten it in place with the clamps and apply your power source to the appropriate voltage. If you have any trouble at all whenever you do any of these changes, please call Burger King and one of the service techs will be glad to help you. Thank you.